Hi, this is Dave Fiore. First, thanks for listening. Doing these podcasts is a privilege, and I'm thankful that these amazing stories are being heard. I'm also grateful to be part of a local podcast community. To help promote Tallahassee area podcasts, we've created the Tallahassee Podcast Network, a Facebook page that highlights new episodes from local podcasts every week. You can follow that page for the latest updates and support local creators. We've also created a Facebook group called Tallahassee Pod People that provides a platform to share your favorite podcasts, ask questions, and share insights on your favorite shows. It's a public group, and I hope you join us there. Now on to this episode of How I Got Here.
Don't worry about your kid being pulled off of the sidewalk or parking lot at the movies. Think about that trafficker who's coming into your kid's smartphone,
Right.
or online gaming system, because that's where the grooming is starting. That's where they're befriending them and building trust. And so more often it's people are trafficked by people they know and they've built relationships with.
From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors. All the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode, I speak with Robin Hassler Thompson, the Executive Director of the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. STAC provides direct support for victims of human trafficking and focuses on community education. Robin says she has always loved learning, but when she got bored with high school in 1976, she jumped into politics, not running for class president, but as a volunteer chair for Jimmy Carter's successful presidential campaign. She attended college in Washington, D.C., and went on to summer school at Oxford before landing in Tallahassee for a program that combined a master's in international affairs and a law degree. Her love of politics led her to the Florida House, the governor's office, and eventually on a State Department trip to Bangladesh that would change her life. Robin has spent much of her career focused on human rights, specifically violence against women and human trafficking, and says, "I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing." We started our conversation talking about growing up in South Florida.
I was there until I went to college, actually. So, yes, I was born in South Florida, actually in Hialeah,
Okay.
which is just in Dade County, just
Yeah.
south of there. And then, yes, went to elementary, middle school, high school. I loved it. There was always the beach. My family was a big beach family and big picnic family, so being outdoors and all the time was wonderful. So that was fun. And I really had a childhood that had a lot going on all the time. I was thankfully one of those kids that could kind of self-entertain. So I was a big reader. I used to play some tennis and some sports. And I think back to that time and I just think, lots of stuff always going on. Both my parents worked, had a kind of a big family.
Yeah, well, tell me about that. What did your parents do?
Well, my dad was an insurance salesman, and my mom worked as a secretary, or as we call them now, administrative assistants.
Right.
And so that was their profession. I'm actually, I think about it now, they were very hard workers, both with high school degrees, essentially. So I'm actually the first person in my family to go to college, get a higher education degree. Right. And so we were just kind of there making it, solid middle class family.
Okay. And you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother, and I have two older stepsisters, one older stepbrother who is deceased.
Okay. And were you close growing up? Were you a little posse together, or what was that dynamic like?
Well, ours was a yours, mine, and ours family, if you know that phrase.
Yeah.
So when my biological mother married my father, my stepfather, he had 3 kids, and then together they had my little brother. So we were all over the place. And right now, they call it a blended family, but it wasn't always easy at all, if you can think about that. And I, I know how it impacted me later in my life because I didn't date anybody who had kids. It was
Really?
going to be one of those times where I saw, gosh, this is a big struggle. It was a lot for my parents. I know they did everything they did the way they needed to do it, the way they could, the best they could. And but it was still really hard. Different religions merged, different families merged, and people were working trying to make it.
Right. So that kind of shaped your view of family moving forward then.
Absolutely. Well, doesn't it always?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you said you played tennis and sports. So what other sports did you play?
Well, it was one of those things where mostly racket sports, I would say. Paddleball, anything. My mom was one of those. I think about kids now, and it just makes me scratch my head because even in the summer when we were kids, my mom would always say, just go out and play, And we had a elementary school and a big recreation center that was kind of across and down the street. So we were there all the time. So ping pong, they always, whatever it was, I seemed to like those kinds of sports. And of course there was swimming and all of that. So, she wasn't a mom who locked the door so we couldn't get back in, but she basically said, go out and play and, come back for lunch or here's your lunch money, whatever it is.
Right.
So that was a lot of that was a lot of what I remember outside in terms of just being always very active.
Yeah. All right. So you're in high school. What were those years like? Were you in clubs or have other interests, or were those good years? Kind of high school for people is either like a peak time or a struggle time. What was high school like for you?
Oh, high school. I think about high school. I think about both. I think about peak and struggle. So I went to a Catholic high school. Before that, I was in public school the whole time. Loved school, loved learning. And so I went to St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale. And Chrissy Everett went there, Brian Piccolo before then. So it has this
huge football tradition.
Huge, which I hate to confess this, but even living in Tallahassee, football's not one of my things at all. Never has been. And there I am, both at St. Thomas.
Right.
And
yeah.
So, so I loved it. I really loved the part of being in school in terms of the learning, the environment. I had some really close friends, but I also started to get pretty bored. And those were the years when, I have to tell you, my mom has been a huge influence in my life. And one of the things that she gave me all the time was this love of politics. So when I started to get, just things weren't, I was in some things. I was in like the Latin club. So you can just take from that what you will, the total nerding out of Robin. But I was on I joined the Jimmy Carter's campaign when I was 1976 when he was coming through Florida. My mom knew somebody who was the Broward County chair, so she said, my daughter's in high school, she doesn't know what to do, and she wants to do something. And that was when it was a horse race at that time. There were 9 or more people running on the Democratic side for president. And so anyway, so I did that. And, the rest is history. March 9th primary, I'll never forget it. I was involved. I actually met him at one point and worked. And I was the Broward County chairperson for the little volunteer group we had.
Wow.
As a high school.
As in high school.
Yeah, as in high school. So that was huge. And I made wonderful friends and had a very exciting time. So the high school part sort of faded away toward the end, at least my senior year. And he won, and I got invited to the inauguration. I actually went to the inaugural.
Wow.
I still remember the dress.
That is very cool.
I still remember hearing Aretha Franklin sing Respect at the Florida Ball, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was terrific, and it inspired me to go to school in Washington, actually.
Yeah. So what was it about politics that intrigued you and got you so motivated?
What was it? I would say almost a sense of you have a responsibility and a duty to make the world a better. It sounds so corny, to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I know.
But that's really kind of what it was all about. Plus, it was exciting. I look at it now, and I see politics even now, as toxic as it has gotten. I feel myself thinking about politics like people can think about sports, statistics, people running, whatever. And it's just really interesting to me.
Yeah. All right. So as you mentioned, you did end up going to college at American University in Washington.
I did.
Right. So why that school, and why you just wanted to be near the action politically, or what was your thought process there?
Part of it was I was really ready to get out of Florida. I was really ready to be in another city, another state. I wanted to explore, and I had gone to Washington and really loved just the whole scene. Then I applied to several schools. One of my good friends was a Notre Dame fan, and not at all to say anything about Notre Dame, but I already told you that I'm not a football person. And so we went to tour a couple of schools, and I did go to Notre Dame, and it was the weekend of I'll never forget this too, at the Alabama football game, and I just...
Didn't care.
I didn't. And,
Not a fan of Touchdown Jesus?
Touchdown Jesus, saw Touchdown Jesus. I realized that, wow, that school has a lot of passion about football, which didn't ring my bell. So,
but coming from a Catholic high school, that's a popular destination.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, very popular. I mean, it was almost like the pinnacle of what you could do.
Right.
So I did apply to American in Georgetown, and I needed to have student aid and scholarships. So American did that, and Georgetown welcomed me but said, "You're on your own, honey." So I picked American, yeah.
And what did you study there?
What a surprise. I studied political science, and I studied literature, and I loved it.
Yeah.
It was a very exciting time for me.
Right. And during that time, after your freshman year, you went to Oxford for a summer?
Well, this was actually my senior year. I was one of the first people to apply for a Rhodes Scholarship from my university.
Okay.
So I did that, and I only got into the semifinals. So I got into the top level for Florida, and then I didn't get to the next level, into the finals. And to do that, it was a big slog. It's a big process, and I was navigating that with the help of several professors. And one of them, and actually I remember her name, Roberta Rubenstein, she just said, "I know you didn't get the Rhodes," and she had written support letters and things like that. "So I know you didn't get that, but here's something called the International Graduate Summer School. And so why don't you apply to that?" And I did, and I got a scholarship. So I spent the summer between undergraduate and law school. I spent that at Oxford.
And what was that experience like? How did that change your worldview or your thought process?
That's such a good question. I think about that, and I remember walking down the streets of Oxford and realized that was my first time I've ever been out of the country. Mm-hmm. So I remember walking down the street one day and thinking, everybody in this place, which was very different from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Washington as well, but everybody here seems to have so much in common with people and myself that I've known all my life. So the idea was everybody wants to be happy, wants to have a strong family life, wants their kids to grow up in a healthy environment, loves food, loves to play. I mean, it was just, I had so much more in common with people in a foreign country than I thought that maybe I would.
Right.
But it really made me see how connected we are, how we're all in the same boat. And I thought that was powerful.
Yeah. All right. Then so you finish up in Washington, and then you had the experience after you finished at American is when you went to England.
Right.
And then you came to Florida State for your master's. So how did you end up in Tallahassee?
Well, I actually, so that was another series of applying. So at the end of my undergraduate years, I was mentored by a wonderful woman named Betty Southard Murphy. And she was on the National Labor Relations Board, and I was trying to figure out what to do. She was a lawyer, very, very powerful, wonderful lawyer in Washington. And I remember talking to her about my career choices going forward as a senior. And she said, and I was so interested in international affairs, travel, diplomacy, and the like. And so what I did was I talked to her about what should I do? I'm thinking about applying to Tufts to get my master's in law and diplomacy, or should I go to law school? And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Young woman, there are people selling books at the DuPont Circle bookstore who have their anyway, who have their master's in law and diplomacy. You go to law school. Go to law school. So that's what I did. I actually applied to FSU Law.
Okay.
And got into FSU. And the reason I went, it was in the capital city, so I could maintain that sort of being close to the
Right.
that, and also because it was in-state tuition, and it was very affordable. I think now, gosh, it was $500 to go to law school my first semester, all the tuition.
Wow.
Even then, though, one course at AU was $500, so I can't even imagine now how students do it. And so when I was at law school, that's when I decided to get a double major and get a master's as well in law. And I'm sorry, it would have been law or it was in international studies and in law.
It wasn't a sequential thing. You were doing both of them at the same time.
That's right.
So I don't know that I've ever heard of a double major master's plus JD at the same time.
It's a joint degree program, and
Okay.
I think I know that other students had done that at FSU, but I was getting, I wasn't really thrilled with law school. I wasn't really happy there, and I needed other kind of stimulation, I guess. So I wanted to get a joint degree. I figured I'm here. I want to learn more. I want to do more things. FSU has this whole other campus that's just down the street from the law school that you never get a chance to see if you go to law school.
Yeah, it is separate.
Yeah. And so it was really one of those things where I just wanted more. And so I did that.
Well, I don't know that a lot of law students are looking for more to add more to their plates. You definitely had a big capacity for learning, I guess, at that time.
Either extremely that or what type A personality, but it was just I was ready to go, you know, and it was exciting to be here. I learned so much and I loved it. And I worked at the legislature. I was an intern. I worked at clerked at the Supreme Court during law school and loved that for a semester, and really took advantage of a lot of just what this town is about on the education side.
And this was early 80s, mid 80s?
This was in 1984.
Okay.
So I graduated in 1984 with both degrees.
Okay. Did you have a career plan at that point? You're done with school. Did you have an idea of where you wanted to go from there?
Well, I had this sense that I wanted to definitely be a lawyer, and didn't know exactly where to land on that. I still was very interested in public policy and politics and all that. At the same time, I realized I wanted to, forge my way in the world, however that would pan out. And so during my legislative, work, I came across people who were lobbying all the time, and I had a wonderful set of mentors when I was in the legislature, and one of them was a staff director. I was in the Commerce Committee working, and one of the lawyers who lobbied there was asking him about hiring associates, and I interviewed, and they offered me a job. So I had a job through that to go back to South Florida, and that was practicing law in Miami for 2 years.
Okay. I've noticed kind of a common theme of mentors through your life and people who have influenced you. Tell me about the importance of that and how that has impacted the direction of your career.
I am thinking about that now too. I haven't really, this is the first time I've ever really noticed how there've been these sort of people who've come in and just sort of guided. There's this Zen saying that's polish your path. You go forward. I haven't really thought about things, plotting things out way into the future. I've kind of tried to figure out what, or just realize what was going on now and how to do the best there, or how to be the happiest, or to just take advantage of, or whatever the thing is to polish your path. And yeah, there have been people there, and I think it happens with a lot of folks, though. I mean, you meet somebody or someone opens a door, and you can decide to walk through or not, and what happens next, kind of thing. But for me, that's how that unfolded. And it was a time, too, I really have to say, I'd interviewed at the law school, and one of the things that I know, I remember this as well, there was a big Miami law firm that was interviewing, and I asked them what was their policy on maternity leave, or at that point I'm a young woman. I don't know what I'm going to do, if I'm going to get married or not. And he looked at me and he goes like, I don't know that we've ever had that come up. And that's when I knew at that point. And right now, I know I can see from your face, you're saying, how could anybody not have a policy like that? It
Or
seems
even
absurd.
thought about it, yeah.
Clearly, and that was so clearly a litmus test for me that they had no clue about what they would do with a woman who got pregnant while they were working for her. And if they had no path on that, what other kinds of discrimination or, willful or other kinds of ignorance do they have about what it's like to be a woman in that firm, for example, in that firm environment? So I think that there were things that motivated me about those ideas of fairness and just being around people who were kind of like-minded or wanted to do the right thing or wanted to go forward and be treated fairly. So that sort of started to resonate with me now that I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, which would, of course, be a common theme of your work for the rest of your time here. So you're at the law firm in Miami, and then at some point you end up back at the governor's office. Is that right?
First, back to the House, so back into the legislature. So yeah, I practiced law for 2 years, and again, Betty Murphy said this to me at one point. I was really not happy, being again, the discrimination against women in the law is legion, but back then, and I think about that. So that would have been the 80s.
Yeah.
I just remember having judges wink at me, little lady me, do all that stuff during motion practice. That was just ridiculous. And the world of being a litigator is not one that suits me. It suits a lot of people, but it didn't suit me at all. So I was litigating. I was doing commercial work, and I wasn't happy. So I wanted to give it 2 years. That was the advice I got from Betty. Give it 2 years, and I'm glad I did, because law school, for me, it teaches you the rules of the game so you can play. And in this sense, I had 2 years, so I know what it's like to, be in depositions, do motion practices, write a contract, all that stuff. So at that point, I did have that under my belt. So I came back to Tallahassee, interviewed for a couple of positions, and got a position in the Florida House. At that time, it was Representative Ron Silver. He later became a senator, but he hired me to be in the majority office, and I worked with him as legal counsel and later as staff director.
Okay. Was that a positive experience?
Totally positive.
Yeah.
That was a time in the legislature when Democrats and Republicans worked together, where there were common goals, where people really – I remember working on prison reform and seeing in our office, in the majority office, having Republicans and Democrats sitting around the table hashing out issues. I was there. It wasn't about – I'm sure it's some levels about some personal power, but
sure,
they really wanted to do the right thing and really wanted to see advancements. And so that was wonderful. And it was from there that when Lawton Childs ran for governor, that I started to work on policy papers for him related to gun reforms, especially, but also criminal justice issues, because my last work in the legislature was in the Criminal Justice Committee in the House as the staff director.
Okay. So you're at the House doing that job, liking it, and then you get offered a job, or how did you end up at the governor's office from there? Yeah,
what happened with that is I was volunteering for Lawton Childs, and then when he won, I was offered a job by the administration.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, and I would include myself in that group, how is a governor's office organized in terms of consultants, advisors, people who do the research and then counsel the governor on certain positions? How does all that fit together, and what was your role in that?
Well, I think there's some standard stuff that I think is still there. So there are general positions like general counsel or press office, lobbyist, et cetera. And then within that, the governor chooses to have advisors around them that are directly on point with certain topics. So Governor Childs had an environmental advisor, criminal justice advisor, et cetera. So there were all those kinds of – maybe there were 4 of us, I think, as policy people. So we were the go-to people on whenever that came up, whether it was a constituent issue or a legislative issue or some other kind of issue of the day. After Governor Childs, so I was a policy person, and then we did create the state's first task force on domestic and sexual violence. And that was really the biggest thing for me with Governor Childs because of the timing of it. If you think about in the mid-'90s, that's when at the federal level, the Violence Against Women Act passed for the first time.
Okay.
That and right after that, O.J. killed Nicole. And allegedly, on the civil side, no question.
Right.
And there was a national teach-in happening on domestic violence. And so prior to the Simpson situation, we created a task force in Florida. And that's what I did for the remainder of the Childs administration. And it was big. It was the first time we had one. It really helped us ride a national wave on this issue. We created information reports and things like that, legal reforms, legislative initiatives, programs that are still in place. So I'm really proud of that. And so then at the end of the Childs administration, I left the Childs administration and went right into my own consulting practice. That was in 1999 and traveled really the country and part of the world working on domestic and sexual violence issues.
Right. And that leads to my question about a trip you took in 2001 that I know had a huge impact on your professional and personal life moving forward. So tell us about that trip.
Okay, so in 2001, yes, I was invited to be part of a State Department mission to Bangladesh. And this was to do training on domestic violence fatality reviews. We had started those in Florida during Childs. And I was it changed my life. That trip changed my life for a lot of reasons. But one of them was we went to a shelter where the people in Dhaka, the capital, they sheltered domestic violence victims, sexual assault victims, and victims of human trafficking. Mm. And at that shelter, there were these little boys. They were 6, 7 years old. And I'll never forget them because they were rescued back from the women who ran the shelter, who were just like people my age and older, grandmothers who would go and get their children who had been kidnapped from Bangladesh into Saudi Arabia, in this case as to be enslaved as camel jockeys. That was their forced labor. But what they did was
to race and bet on?
Yes, because the children were young and light and screamed, which made the camels run faster. That's how just horrible. So I'll never forget those kids. I never forget going back to the hotel and saying, I got to do something. Because just weeks prior, I had been in D.C. and watched a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act that included the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was the first big set of national laws on this. Right. So then I came back after seeing that. I just said, I have to do something around human trafficking. And literally within weeks, I got a call from Terry Coonan at the Human Rights Center here at Florida State. Said, hey, Robin, would you like to work with us on human trafficking issues? And so I said, hell yeah. And that was the first time I did something big in terms of a project here in the U.S. in Florida on the issue of trafficking.
Okay. And the consulting firm that you formed that allowed what was that? What role did that play, and what kind of clients did you have, and how did all that work?
All the work I did as a consultant has been around either violence against women issues or human trafficking, and generally a human rights agenda, if you will. So that included entities like the Human Rights Center at Florida State. It also includes national technical assistance projects on the Violence Against Women Act and other implementation of other laws and programs. And so it's all that's generally what it is. And my consulting firm is a one-woman show. That's me.
Right. And you still have it today?
I do.
Okay. All right, we're going to get to what you're doing now in a minute, but I want to hit one other thing first, and that is that your career is full of board service, honors, significant presentations over the last couple decades. Your CV was quite lengthy with all the places that you have, all the ways you've contributed to these subjects. You've been honored as Volunteer of the Year at the Refuge House here in Tallahassee, Advocate of the Year for the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. You've been in Tallahassee Democrats' 25 Women You Need to Know back in 2011. And just last year, you were named the 2021 Trailblazer for the Oasis Center for Women and Girls. Just curious what stands out to you when you think about that body of work and some of the impact you've had in these important areas?
I'm immensely proud that of that. Those are such incredible honors that a part of me doesn't understand, because I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, it feels and it's so gratifying to be recognized on the one hand. On the other hand, I see people around me all the time who should also be recognized, if you know what I mean. So it's validating, it's affirming, it's amazing. It's really I don't even know how to describe how I feel about it, to be honest with you. It's a very, very it makes me feel connected. It makes me feel like I'm part of our world.
All right, now let's get to what your main focus is now, and that is in 2016, you were co-founder and are CEO of the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, which is more commonly known as STAC. Tell us about that organization, what your mission is, and really what STAC's all about.
STAC is about two things. One is about providing direct aid and support to people who are sex or labor trafficked, and so that's a big thing to do, if you know what I mean, because trafficking is one of the most traumatic things that could happen to a person. It's a form of absolute subjugation, control in both sex and labor situations. And the people who are trafficked are highly traumatized adults, children, immigrants, U.S. citizens, everybody. So that's one of the things we do, is provide direct assistance with the help of a lot of community partners. And then the other thing we do is we do a lot of community education. So we do webinars and presentations and have a bang-up website. I love it. And just do a lot of work to get the word out.
Okay. So I know the term human trafficking gets used a lot, but could you define that for us? Like, tell us what really is human trafficking?
Really simply put, human trafficking is the exploitation of one person by another for commercial gain or benefit. So if you think about somebody taking you and forcing you to work or have sex for money or for some other benefit to that person, that is what it is. So when it comes to forced labor, which really forced sex is a form of forced labor as well, but if somebody is saying you have to do this for me for money or for you to get this benefit, that is what it is, and the person can't leave. So when you have a child, for example, you don't have to show that child was forced or coerced, because a child is a child and doesn't have the free will to either consent to sex or agree to be, work in a field or a restaurant for, 17 hours a day. On the labor side, that's a Florida law protection that isn't there at the federal level. But anyway,
right.
But if you're an adult and you're forced to do that, you can't leave. You're in a situation where that trafficker has really controlled you to such an extent that you can't leave the situation. And if you do, you're going to be facing consequences. You're going to be possibly harmed. Those you love are going to be harmed. So there's a lot of coercion and control that goes on with this.
Right. And sometimes people are in that situation because of abduction. Other times, right, they're tricked into it, or it comes in and it seems like it's a good thing at first, and then they're in the web and they can't get out, right? So there are different paths to entry into this world.
There are, and by far the most common path is a path of befriending building of trust, coercion, and then payback. I think Hollywood has done us a great disservice when they have movies like Taken that show people.
That's what I think of first.
Yeah,
right?
you think people getting snatched off the street, that whole snatch and grab thing. We're trying to do so much education now to tell parents it's not. Don't worry about your kid being pulled off of the sidewalk or parking lot at the movies. Think about that trafficker who's coming into your kid's smartphone
Right.
or online gaming system, because that's where the grooming is starting. That's where they're befriending them and building trust. And so more often it's people are trafficked by people they know and they've built relationships with.
How much does human trafficking impact Tallahassee and Leon County? What are our numbers like compared to other places?
It's really hard to say what the numbers are for a lot of reasons that we need to, maybe have another
A whole nother thing.
on
yeah.
that. Yeah. But here's the thing. Florida's third of the nation. A lot of people think it doesn't happen in our area because we're not in Miami or Atlanta or, even Jacksonville. But it does. Half of our caseload are labor trafficking victims right now. And we also have the law structured so that you can't tell when someone makes an arrest that that's been a trafficking arrest. So what I mean by that is trafficking is a crime of many crimes. So a trafficker can be a money launderer. So if we have 10 convictions for money laundering here, none of them could say human trafficking, but they could be trafficking cases. So we have a hard time nailing down exact numbers because they're simply not gathered by any official sources. What we have seen in the past, though, is with surveys that are done, we think that this is a bigger issue than has come out. So, like I said, at this point, during the pandemic, our caseload tripled. We were helping 13 people at one point who were both sex and labor trafficked, some of whom were also victims of domestic violence, for example, or victims of other crimes. Because, again, trafficking is a crime of many crimes.
Right. Is the needle moving? Are you making progress? Or are obviously the dangers are always there and probably increasing. How do you feel about what kind of progress you're making?
We are making progress. I can tell for the last 7 years since we've been doing this work that we've had more funding come into our area in terms of federal grants to help with direct victim services and aid. We've seen better laws passed. We've seen more people getting educated about it. And yet I see that it's still a great big mountain to climb, that there's still so much education to do of everybody in the community, really. It's somebody who's cleaning your office at 11 o'clock at night. That person might be trafficked and you wouldn't even know it. Someone working in the parking lot, someone, cleaning the hotel room down the street. And what we're trying to do now is help people recognize signs and indications so that they can know it might be happening and do something about it.
Okay. Well, you're working with Leon County right on an online training program. So tell us about that.
Yes, Leon County funded STAC last year to develop something called STAC Pro. STACpro.org is the site. It's a free 1 hour, little bit more training program for all businesses and workplaces to be able to understand what trafficking is, how they might see it, come to work, essentially,
Right.
and how they can respond, how they can recognize indications, how they can write those down, how they can report them, how they can make sure that someone is not being endangered. Because we're seeing, I remember doing just helping one of the Leon County Commissioners, Rick Minor, do some research on the area, and I just Googled North Monroe and human trafficking, and something came up on a travel website that says don't stay at any of these hotels because there's trafficking there. Now, that's something that's affecting the bottom line of everybody in that area,
Yeah.
right? So it's smarter for businesses to know what's going on so they can prevent it, stop it, report it. And as well, as a consumer, how it is now. You want to do good with what you're buying, and you want to support people who understand what's going on and are helping in the community. So we feel like when businesses can do this training and get recognized, they will also do better on their bottom lines.
And I imagine there's a lot to learn that we're all probably, as business owners, pretty naive to what's really happening.
Exactly. And people always tell me, Dave, they always say, what can I do? What can I do? I want to do something. And really it starts with yourself at home. Just be more educated on how to see it. I was at a training the other day with Salter Mitchell, PR. You probably know Heidi Otway.
Sure, yeah.
And we did the training. She had a lunch and learn with everybody in the office. And she just at one point said, after you see this, you can't unsee it. After you know it, you can't unknow it. And that's what we're hoping for.
I'm interested in the impact working in this area has on you personally. It's such a huge problem and you see it up close every day. How do you keep yourself from getting overwhelmed by it all?
How do you keep yourself from being, I learned something a long time ago. I was a volunteer at Refuge House and I worked in the shelter. I worked answering the hotline. I helped survivors there to make dinner and help with their kids and all of that. And what I realized, and this would be 25 years ago, is that I am such a sponge. I cannot be close to people who are in great pain. It's really hard because I take it in. And so what I've learned is I work with people who can. So we have a wonderful victim advocate who works with us now, and I work with others who are directly working with people. But I know to stay a few steps away and work on policy and do presentations and right now organizing stuff around STAC. So how I keep saying is I know who I am. I know that's a possibility. And so I also try to do things that are fun. I make jewelry. I actually have a jewelry business that started because some of my work colleagues saw some of my pieces and said, I want one.
Oh, that's fun. Well, tell us real quick, how can people, do you have a website or anything?
I don't. They could.
They just reach out to you?
Yeah, I had a Facebook page. Actually, I have 4 pieces at Lemoyne now.
Oh, nice.
At a show. But they could just reach out to me, call me. And
so what kind of jewelry is it?
Like this, what I'm wearing.
Oh,
so I have lava and turquoise and a little silver. So it's beaded jewelry. Okay. And I do that as I always like. That's
it's an
my
outlet.
That's
kind of
my
thing?
Right brain activity. Right. It taps into that creative side. So I love it. It's turned into something that I just love it. Half of my office is even like one side is all of the policy work and STAC and all the consulting work, and the other side I built out to have it store all the beads and all the books and all the things and my tools. So it's kind of emblematic. So that's one thing I do. I also I'm a reader. I love to read, and I love to just get out of and it can be hard too because I need to really separate from all of this. The potential pain, the seriousness of what's going on in the world, and I like to read all kinds of fiction and that. So I'm still a reader. I was always a reader when I was a kid, and I still am. So I do that, and also try to spend as much time with just an amazing set of friends and family.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that. Tallahassee is well known, I think, for its strong volunteer community, nonprofit environment and community. And, the business community and the nonprofits work well together to, create a good quality of life for people here. Has that been your experience and the things you've been trying to accomplish, finding people to help you along with that?
Absolutely. And that is one of the greatest truths with a capital T, is that help is always near. And I believe that to my core for whatever it is, personal or professional. And that has truly played out in just as you've said with the business community and nonprofits. For us, at the very beginning of STAC Pro and this business training, I did a podcast with Sue Dick at the Tallahassee Chamber.
Yeah, I heard that, yeah.
And so there they were. Same thing with the Capital City Chamber, now working with Katrina Tuggerson as well. So they're there. And we trained recently at the Tallahassee Board of Realtors. And so absolutely, I think that's the only way we can do this because we're all in this together. Like, and if everybody can help themselves, then what are we doing here? So yeah, I think it has come out. And I think it's really a matter of just really tapping into the base goodness of people, and I think they'll come forward.
Right. So I guess you're glad you stayed in Tallahassee.
I am. I can't decide whether to call it a small big town or a big small town, because every time you do, there's no 6 degrees of separation.
No.
There is absolutely not the case. And so, yeah, you are connected in such terrific ways. I can't imagine picking up and moving and starting out again. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it is a wonderful place.
Right. So you mentioned your friends and family. So just wanted to touch on your family a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your family now.
Sure. Well, here in town, my mom is here. She is 92, and she's doing great. So I see her all the time. We've always been very close our whole life. So that's just difficult challenges as we all age,
Sure.
but in particular, just recently. So working there has been a really through a lot of issues, and had a great day yesterday. She's taught me one day at a time is the total way to go when it comes to life and enjoying what's in front of you, right in front of you at this moment. So that's been a really great lesson.
Yeah.
So I live here also with my husband, Dan. And all my other siblings, though, are scattered across the state. But at least they're all in the state of Florida, so we have a chance to see each other.
Great. All right, 2 more questions, and then we're done. Robin, looking back, what is the one thing or person that changed or altered the trajectory of your life to this point?
I would have to say it has been my mother at all these various points. So I guess she changed the trajectory when she birthed me.
That's a
big one.
Yeah.
I'd say that's a big one. But she's always been there to guide and support in ways that are just, again, still happening. And then when I think of others, I cannot think of one single person, because there have been so many junctures where somebody has said something, done something, made a comment. One of the most difficult times in my life, I think I had a light bulb go on in a major way. It was a casual comment from somebody who was cutting my hair. And I just truly believe that there are, if you think of them as angels, if you think of them as any kind of guide or whatever it is, it's somebody who's going to be there to say what you need to hear and be open to hearing it. So I think of it more as a philosophy of being open, because...
Can you share what they said to you?
Well, it was actually, I was talking about being in a really, really bad and difficult relationship. And she looked at me and she said, "Honey, that ain't love." And I went,
yeah, pretty simple, but
she is
true.
So right. And then I walked out of there and said, "I'm getting out of that relationship."
Wow.
Honey, that ain't love. That I remember her saying that. And of course, how many of us have been in relationships when we've known time to leave, but you kind of stick it out a little longer, hoping.
Right.
So that was it. So there are just times when I just think that those messages are around us all the time, and we can tune in, or we can let our egos take over. But I think if you can get out of your own way and be open, that's the best way to go.
Yeah. That is good advice. All right. Final question. The podcast is named How I Got Here, and we've talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in the next 3 to 5 years?
3 to 5 years. Here might be not even in this country. I love France. I would love to go live in France in 5 years if I could, for 6 months, or travel, or just kind of put down roots in a community that is so very different. That's one of the things I want to do, is I really want to be in another place.
Right. Why France?
I think I have several past lives there. At least one.
At least one, maybe.
I know, because I was walking around Paris. I knew where to go. Anyway, that's another story. But I have loved every time I've been there. Same thing with England and London. But I do want to travel. I want to go to Japan and go to the baths. I want to be in other cultures, and I think that will be a good chunk of my time, because I'm 62 now, and I figure when retirement comes, if it ever comes, it's going to be a quasi situation.
Right.
I probably will never stop doing work I find meaningful, but I would like to be doing some of that.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com.